Today, we're diving deep into geography, cartography, and perception. This isn't about politics. This isn't about conspiracy theories. This is about how maps work, how projections distort reality, and how the United States appears larger and more dominant than it truly is on most traditional world maps. Let's start with something called the Mercator projection. If you grew up in a Western school system, chances are you've seen this map thousands of times. It's rectangular. The continents are neatly spread out. North America is near the top left, Europe near the top center, and Africa sits below Europe, looking noticeably smaller than it should. The Mercator projection was created in 1569 by Gerardus Mercator. It wasn't designed for classroom walls. It was designed for navigation, specifically for sailors. The genius of the Mercator map is that it preserves angles. If you sail in a straight line on a Mercator map, following a constant compass direction, you'll reach your destination accurately. For maritime navigation in the 16th century, that was revolutionary. But here's the catch. To preserve angles, the Mercator projection sacrifices size accuracy. The further you move from the equator, the more land masses are stretched. Countries in higher latitudes appear much larger than they actually are. Countries near the equator appear smaller. Now look at where the United States sits. A large portion of it lies in the mid to high northern latitudes. Alaska sits extremely north. That means the United States gets visually inflated on a Mercator map. It appears significantly larger than its true proportional size compared to equatorial regions. Let's compare the United States with Africa. On a typical Mercator map, the US looks comparable to Africa, maybe slightly smaller but still close. In reality, Africa is more than 3 times larger than the United States. Africa covers about 30 million square kilometers. The United States covers about 9.8 million square kilometers. You could fit the US inside Africa 3 times over and still have room left. Yet visually, many people grow up thinking Africa is roughly similar in size to the United States. That's the illusion. Now let's talk about Greenland. Greenland often looks enormous on maps. It looks similar in size to the United States. But in reality, Greenland is about 2.1 million square kilometers. The US is nearly 5 times larger. Greenland appears inflated because it sits so far north. This distortion affects how we subconsciously rank countries in importance and power. Bigger looks stronger. Bigger looks more dominant. Maps are not just geographical tools, they're psychological tools. But size distortion isn't the only way perception gets shaped. Another subtle influence is map centering. Most maps used in the United States are centered on North America. The country is placed prominently, often in the upper middle left of the map. This creates a visual focus. It feels central, important, anchored. If you look at a world map produced in East Asia, you'll notice something interesting. The map is centered on Asia. The United States appears split at the edges. It suddenly feels less central, less dominant. The visual hierarchy shifts. The truth is, no country is truly center on a spherical planet. Centering is a choice, and that choice influences perception. Now let's move to another misconception, the width of the United States compared to Europe. Many Americans grow up hearing that the US is roughly the size of Europe. That's partially true, but not in the way people imagine. The contiguous United States is about 4,500 kilometers from coast to coast. Europe, depending on where you measure, stretches around 4,000 kilometers across. So yes, they are comparable in width. But Europe is not a single country. It's a continent made up of dozens of nations, cultures, languages, and political systems. When people compare the US to Europe, they're comparing one country to an entire continent. That framing can distort understanding. It creates a sense of equivalency that overlooks Europe's complexity and fragmentation. Now let's talk about Alaska. On many maps, Alaska is repositioned to sit just below Canada in a small box. That alone changes perception. It makes Alaska look closer to the lower 48 states than it actually is. In reality, Alaska is separated by Canada and stretches far west toward Russia. Alaska is enormous. It alone is about 1.7 million square kilometers. It's larger than many countries combined. Yet because it's often shrunk and boxed in map insets, its scale becomes abstract rather than impactful. Then there's Hawaii, often placed in a small box next to Alaska. But geographically, Hawaii is in the central Pacific Ocean, thousands of kilometers away. Its repositioning simplifies map layout, but alters geographic reality. Maps simplify the world. That's their job. But simplification always involves distortion. Let's look at latitude again. Because the United States sits north of the equator, seasons are opposite from countries in the Southern Hemisphere. When it's summer in the US, it's winter in Australia. This seems obvious, but many people subconsciously view the Northern Hemisphere as the top and the Southern Hemisphere as the bottom. That language implies hierarchy. Top sounds superior, bottom sounds lesser. In reality, there is no up or down in space. North is not inherently above south. It's just a convention. Another misconception involves population density. The United States feels vast and spacious, and it is, but compared to countries like India or China, its population density is relatively low. The US has around 330 million people. India has over 1.4 billion people. China has over 1.4 billion people. On a Mercator map, Russia looks gigantic, and it is geographically large, but much of Russia lies in sparsely populated Siberian regions. Similarly, large portions of the western United States are sparsely populated deserts and mountain ranges. Visual size doesn't equal human concentration. Let's also talk about projection alternatives. There are other map projections like the Gall-Peters projection, which preserves area but distorts shapes. On a Gall-Peters map, Africa appears much larger and more proportional. The United States appears smaller compared to equatorial countries. Shapes look stretched vertically near the equator and horizontally near the poles, but area is more accurate. Each projection has trade-offs. There is no perfect flat map of a spherical Earth. Every projection distorts something: size, shape, distance, or direction. The key lesson here is not that you were intentionally deceived, it's that geography is shaped by mathematical compromise. The Earth is a globe. Flattening it requires distortion. But repeated exposure to one projection can quietly shape worldview. When a country appears larger on a map, it can feel more powerful. When it sits at the center, it feels more important. When other regions appear smaller, they can subconsciously feel less significant. That doesn't mean maps are propaganda. It means perception is powerful. The United States is large. It's the third or fourth largest country in the world by total area, depending on how measurements are calculated. It spans multiple time zones. It has vast climate diversity, from